Hi, good afternoon. I'm coming to you today from our Weather Center studio, and we are talking today lesson topic, but I did want to tell you guys I'm a little late because I had an interview with a National Hurricane Center specialist as we are gearing up for hurricane season now. So many weather things to talk about, but today our topic is the water cycle. And this is one that I think is really exciting and interesting. I hope you do too. And this weather lesson is especially geared toward students. So if you are a student and you are interested in science and really many different sciences, in rocks, in land issues, if you're interested in oceans and rivers, if you're interested in weather, there are so many things that this affects. So I wanted to start with a nice illustration, and thank you to the National Weather Service, of course, because they do a great job of showing things like this. This is an illustration of the water cycle, and after I finish with this weather lesson, I'm going to upload or add the links to both this page, which I think would be fun to color if you are a student at home during these isolating distancing times. Or there is another thing that I wanted to show you, which is the water cycle wheel. I think I really like wheels. Do you guys remember when we did our star wheel ago? So this is the water cycle wheel, and I'll show you more about this in just a second. But the water cycle, really what this is of course different forms of water changing into either solid or gas and back into liquid state. So it happens all around the Earth's atmosphere, around mountains, it happens with trees, it happens at the surface, it interacts with water, groundwater below the soil, and we talk about things like condensation and evaporation and transpiration and all of these really cool processes that allows water to circulate around our atmosphere and into our soil, below our soil, all along the surface and into the upper parts of the atmosphere where there are clouds and of course precipitation and things like that. So this can also be called the hydrologic circle or the water cycle. So this is just a really cool thing, very central to meteorology, of course, as we are constantly talking about especially precipitation, which is usually in the form of liquid, but can of course also come as sleet or snow. Not as common here in Louisiana, right? So there are all these different terms, and we're going to talk about a few of them today, and we're going to get into our water cycle wheel, which again, I like star wheels, I like water wheels. We have lots of wheel action apparently in these weather lessons. So here are some of the different terms. Again, I really urge you when I put up the link to maybe download it, print out one of these, and just color it. I think that would be a relaxing, fun activity, and then the water cycle too. So we have so many different things to talk about. Number one is precipitation. So that would be water, again, either in a liquid or in a solid form falling to earth. So most of us know about that one. We also have something called runoff. We talk about this a lot as meteorologists in our weather forecasts because what we deal with runoff is a pretty common thing for, of course, when we get heavy rain events, where's the water going to go? So sometimes we talk about that. That is the transport of either river or stream water, or sometimes it can be rain events or ice and glaciers. It can be all these different ways that water is transported. So that's what that means when you hear about runoff. There is also something called deposition, which is water vapor transferring to ice. So this is pretty interesting. This is when water vapor becomes ice crystals, and it often is in the form of frost. So when you have a clear, calm sort of night, especially in the winter, sometimes you can see this happening. Water vapor collecting on different things and just shooting straight to ice and skipping the liquid phase. So that is one of the different kind of processes in the water cycle. There's also something some of you may know, especially my student friends who have gone through this in their science classes, condensation, which of course would be water vapor, a gaseous form, into liquid. So of course condensation we know is of course responsible for clouds forming, where water vapor is condensing in our atmosphere and forming these clouds which are made of liquid particles. Of course it's also what forms on a glass that is filled with cold liquid in the summer when it's warm outside and you can see the condensation happening. There is something called, thanks to your comments, guys, sublimation. And so this we've actually talked about before in New Orleans, which is kind of crazy. But a few years ago, we had some ice and snow on the ground, and we were talking about whether it would increase or decrease depending on the cloud cover. And the idea was that there might actually be some clouds over a layer of ice and snow, just a tiny dusting, of course, we had, but that would be a concern, that the ice and snow would transport directly to becoming a gas and bypassing the liquid phase as well. This is something, again, that can contribute to cloud cover, and sometimes that can keep things colder when you have ice already on the ground or snow already on the ground. Just a kind of interesting meteorologic process that can happen where it sublimates, and the sublimation brings it straight into the gas form and eventually could produce clouds farther up if it were to become droplets. Also, glaciers can lose ice in the process of sublimation. There's also something called transpiration, which is liquid going to a gas. And this would have to do with plants and leaves. So this is a big deal in that about 90% of water that enters the root of a plant eventually transpires into the atmosphere. So yet another cool thing that you see in the water cycle. There is evaporation. So many different processes going on. I'm glad you guys are liking the video. So this is evaporation, very important, and we might be able to do a whole weather lesson on something like this at some point. This is, of course, when we have oceans, rivers, streams, lakes, etc., providing moving from liquid to gas as far as the water goes, and this provides about 90% of the moisture in the atmosphere. It's all based on evaporation. Not all, but largely based on that. And then we have something called percolation, which is where the water goes deep into the ground. So it kind of goes below the soil layer and gets deep underground and is, transferred into what we would call groundwater. So when you look at our water cycle map, again, as we get a little bit closer, you can see all of these things happening. Here is sublimation. We talked about that, going from ice or snow straight into the air. Condensation with clouds forming, and we have, what else? Clouds forming over here as well, creating eventually precipitation, but we have evaporation as well into the atmosphere from the cloud droplets, evaporation from rivers and lakes into the atmosphere, and here is runoff moving, transporting water, of course, and sometimes in different phases. And we have down here percolation, bringing some of the water into the groundwater, again, which would be below the soil. And then we have other areas of evaporation, runoff, condensation, and other things like that. And of course, transportation of water would just be the movement of it, the transport of it from these different phases and in these different processes. So again, good idea for kids at home if you are still joining me for weather lessons with ideas for your students who might be interested in science but have sometimes some limited resources or options at this point. And I guess we're getting into summer, aren't we? So just an idea for kids to do in the summertime. Coloring in a water cycle. This might be relaxing for adults too. I do like to color with colored pencils and paint and things like that from time to time. There is also a really cool tool, I guess you could call it, and this is on the National Weather Service site. And again, I will put the link up, but all you do is go to this link and you print out these two pieces of paper. And what you do is cut them out. So I cut out my two circles. This one really easy. This one was a little bit difficult because you have to cut out these little wedge shapes to make the wheel work. So I was able to do it, don't worry, but it was a little tricky. I was kind of like, oh yeah, this stuff can be hard. So you would cut those two out, and then you would overlay them one on top of the other to create a water cycle wheel. And so this is really cool because it is I think just really fun. I like spinning wheels, as we've discussed. So here's one, and you kind of go to each topic. This one is surface and groundwater flow, and here is the information on that. And then you can also see kind of on the opposite side, transportation. Here's plant uptake. Here's transpiration, deposition, which we talked about, condensation, and these different precipitation. Did I say that one? So you can kind of go through the wheel and see what they each explain. So I think this is really fun. If you need a sciencey sort of activity for your kids at home, this is a really good thing too. And again, the National Weather Service did a great job, I think, putting some of this information online, and I will give you a link to that when I finish this Facebook Live. So again, thank you for joining me. I was late today again because I had an interview going on earlier at 1 p.m. That I couldn't change. So I came on at about 1:14, 15, something like that, and I've been with you guys for a few minutes now. The water cycle really is extremely important for meteorology. We talk and think about all of these things a lot, and this is really a lot of what we do with our daily, time at work, is thinking about the precipitation and different things like that, kind of studying different areas of evaporation. And water is, of course, extremely interesting, not just for hydrologists and people who deal directly with rivers and things like that, but for all meteorologists, and dare I say all people, we all rely on water. So important, right? So I think actually we're going to do another Facebook Live weather lesson dealing especially with maybe oceans and bodies of water and things like that, because there is a lot to talk about with that. So very, very basic. Again, if you have students at home, need something to do with them, want something kind of fun and educational, here's the couple of things that you'll want to do. Print out the water cycle page, and then just print out these 2 extra pages to get the circles so that you can make the water wheel. And I will provide those links. I'll put them up in just a second when I finish the Facebook Live. So you guys, I'm glad to see some of your comments. Thanks for joining me. And I like to see your comments and when you let me know where you're watching from and things like that. I'm in the studio today. You may realize once again, instead of at home, but I think tomorrow I'm going to be at home after working the early morning shift. I've been working that for a few days this week, and the noon show as well. But tomorrow I think I'm going to be back at 1 p.m. hopefully, and we might be baking tomorrow. I'm going to see what we decide to do. So if you're into baking, join me for that. We'll talk about some science and baking stuff, and of course just have fun baking on a Wednesday afternoon. And we might do something else. I don't know. Haven't decided yet. But I do appreciate you guys tuning in and joining me on this Facebook Live. Our weather lessons still continuing, actually, I guess, as we get, into May? Is it? Yeah, Cinco de Mayo today. So early May still, not quite mid-May just yet. But we are continuing into the month of May a little bit more and more and more. So thanks for joining me. Thanks for your comments. You guys have a wonderful afternoon, and I will see you tomorrow for another Facebook Live at 1 p.m. on our WWL TV Facebook Live Facebook page. Take care.